USPSA and IPSC come from the exact same roots, but on the range, they are a lot more different than you think. Today, we're talking about the massive difference between IPSC and USPSA. We're going to briefly talk about the story of IPSC and USPSA, dive deep into how the gun divisions and the physical measuring boxes change what you can build, look at the strict gear and belt rules, check out the different paper target shapes and how the stages themselves are arranged, and by the end of the video, you'll know exactly how to prep your gear no matter which side of the pond you're shooting on. And without further ado, let's get to it. Let's talk about the story of IPSC. Practical shooting evolved from the efforts in the 1950s, primarily in California, to develop and test real-world handgun skills for self-defense. Key early figures included Jeff Cooper, Jack Weaver, Ray Chapman, and others associated with the Southwest Pistol League. These shooters moved beyond traditional bullseye or quick-draw competitions towards more realistic practical courses that tested techniques, equipment, and training under stress. Experiments happened independently among private individuals, law enforcement, and military personnel. And it was in May of 1976 that IPSC was founded. An international group of enthusiasts gathered at the Columbia International Combat Pistol Conference in Columbia, Missouri, and Jeff Cooper chaired the event with about 40 to 45 delegates from various countries. They formally established the International Practical Shooting Confederation in May of 1976, adopting a constitution and basic rules. Jeff Cooper was elected the first president. The focus was on promoting practical pistol shooting worldwide as a sport, with principles balancing precision, power, and speed. Early matches used simple rules, and the sport spread to Europe, Australia, South America, Africa, and beyond. IPSC standardized elements like the Comstock scoring method, power factor, targets, and more. We're talking about all of that in this video. It grew into the world's largest practical shooting organization, now with over 100 regions and disciplines including handgun, rifle, and shotgun. World shoots are held every 3 years. Last year, it was in South Africa. Now let's talk USPSA. Practical shooting was already active in the US before and alongside IPSC's founding. US shooters and clubs participated in the Columbia Conference and early international efforts, but it was around 1981 that USPSA was formed as the US region of IPSC. In 1984, USPSA was officially incorporated as a non-profit and became the formal US regional body of IPSC. Over time, USPSA developed its own rulebook while remaining aligned with IPSC principles. USPSA now has tens of thousands of members and organizes major national championships. Organizationally, it is broken down in 8 geographic areas, and those areas are further split into local sections to manage clubs on the ground. USPSA also acquired the Steel Challenge Shooting Association in 2007, but that is a whole other video. Today, there are over 250,000 IPSC members, of which about 37,000 are USPSA members. Now that we know how these organizations are structurally connected, let's talk about how they actually run on the range. USPSA Rule 8.7.1, you're officially allowed to take a sight picture before the beep, but with a strict condition. It can only be done from the designated Make Ready location. Once the range officer gives you the Make Ready command, you can draw your unloaded pistol, point it downrange at a target, and look through your red dot to make sure that the glass is clear, that the brightness is adjusted correctly, and that the dot is actually turned on. You can even do a try-fire trigger press if you want. Once you're satisfied, you load the gun, holster it, and assume the start position. If you try that routine at an IPSC match, you're gonna get cooked by the RO. Under IPSC, competitors are strictly prohibited from taking a sight picture or dry firing prior to the start signal. IPSC views aiming at a match targets before the beep as a form of unearned practice. If you draw your gun and aim it during load and make ready, you will be hit with an official warning for the first offense. If you do it again anywhere else in the match, you get a procedural penalty for every single occurrence. They built a very specific exception into the rules, but just for electronic sights. You can see if your dot is on by pointing the gun only at the ground and not having a sight picture anywhere. The way your points are tracked also has a major fundamental difference. If you're shooting IPSC, every single stage that you encounter is going to use Comstock scoring. You can fire as many rounds as you want to make up for bad hits, the time keeps running, and your final score is simply your points divided by your time. We'll circle back on that later. In USPSA, while the vast majority of a match is Comstock, they still use the Virginia count scoring, specifically on classifier stages. The Virginia count puts a strict limit on the exact number of rounds you can fire. If you throw an extra shot to make up for a miss or you perform an extra reload, the procedural penalties are going to cook you. IPSC completely removed this style of scoring from standard handgun stages to preserve the pure freestyle play, while USPSA keeps it alive to strictly test shooters when they cannot make mistakes. Then we have the way that matches are graded. In USPSA, matches scale upward by tiers. A local match is a tier 1, a state championship is a tier 2, and the USPSA national championship is a tier 5. In IPSC, they use levels using Roman numerals. barrels. Your local match is a level 1, your regional championship is a level 3, and the massive IPSC World Shoot is a level 5. If you say, I'm shooting a level 5 match to a USPSA shooter, they'll know what you mean, but technically you're mixing up the rulebooks. Actually, let's talk about hit factor, because it's important to understand this before we keep going. Your hit factor is the exact number of points that you are scoring per second on that stage. The person with the highest hit factor wins the stage. It is a way of rewarding speed and accuracy at the same time. You cannot win a match by just being the fastest shooters if you're throwing misses and charlies, and you cannot win by shooting all alphas if you move like a snail. To give you an idea of how this looks on the clock, imagine there's a 12-round stage with 60 maximum points. Shooter A runs through it blazing fast in 5 seconds but throws a bunch of charlies and scores 50 points. Their hit factor is 10. Shooter B takes a very deep breath, shoots a perfect 60 points, but it takes them 6.5 seconds. Their hit factor is going to be 9.23. Even though Shooter B shot perfectly, Shooter A is still going to win that stage because their points per second ratio was higher. Now let's talk about how you actually measure up against other shooters, because both organizations have a system to make sure that you're competing against people of your own skill level or demographic. But the way that they track it and how much emphasis they place on it is completely different. First, we need to clear up some terminology, because in practical shooting, classes and categories mean two totally different things. Classes are your skill levels, while categories are your demographic, like your age or your gender. Let's talk classes. When it comes to raw skill, both IPSC and USPSA use the exact same letter brackets to grade you. You start out as unclassified, and as you shoot, you earn a spot in one of these brackets based on your performance percentage. Even though the letters are identical for both IPSC and USPSA, it is basically the only thing they have in common. In the United States, USPSA lives and breathes by the classification system. It is a massive part of the local match culture. Almost every local weekend USPSA match you go to will include at least one official classifier stage. Classifiers are highly standardized, short, hyper-technical stages like the famous El Presidente, where the targets, distances, and movements are exactly the same whether you shoot in Florida, California, or New York. USPSA takes your hit factor, compares it to the highest recorded hit factors for that exact stage, and spits out a percentage. To get your initial classification, USPSA looks at your first 4 valid scores. Once you're established, the system constantly calculates a rolling average of your 6 best scores out of your most recent 8 valid classifier submissions. The database updates every single week, so if you go out and crush a few classifier, your percentage jumps and you get bumped up to the next class. It creates a built-in game within the game for local shooters to chase that coveted GM card. And it is important to note that once you are a GM, you are always a GM unless you ask to be downgraded. Now let's talk IPSC. For a long time, IPSC didn't really have a centralized weekly rolling system like USPSA. Your status was mostly determined by your raw percentage finishes at massive, multi-day, regional or continental championship. However, they introduced the ICS, the IPSC classification system, to bridge the gap. It works similarly to USPSA. You shoot designated IPSC classifier stages, your hits are uploaded, and then you get your initial classification after 4 scores. After that, your rank is determined by the average of your best 4 scores out of your most recent 8. But here's the culture shock. Globally, IPSC shooters don't obsess with their classification letter nearly as much as USPSA shooters do. If you look at the results on a major match in Europe, Canada, or Latin America, you will see a massive sea of unclassified next to almost everyone's name. The reason for this is that the IPSC classification system is entirely optional. IPSC leaves it to each individual country's region to decide if they want to run a classification system or not. And honestly, most regions don't really bother with it. Now let's talk categories. When you first sign up for a match, you can enter your division, but also check a box for category. Some examples are lady, junior if you're under 18, senior, which is over 50 in IPSC and over 55 in USPSA. Then you have super senior, which is over 60 in IPSC and over 65 in USPSA. And USPSA has military, which IPSC does not. Now we talked about the classes and the categories. Now let's talk division. Let's begin with IPSC. Open division, as the name implies, loosens basically all the restrictions. Basically, if you can dream it, you can build it. Guns are custom built with the frame-mounted red dot optics, massive compensators and ported barrels to completely eliminate muzzle rise. There is no minimum trigger pull weight and no restriction on gun size. The only real limit here is the magazine length, which cannot exceed 170 mm. Loaded with 9 mm or 38 Super, these magazines routinely hold between 28 to 29 rounds. Then we have the standard division. Think of the standard division as the original division before red dots took over. Guns are usually iron sights only, with red dots and compensator being strictly illegal. However, you can use extended magwells which are up to 35 mm wide and thumb rest to help you control vertical recoil. The gun must fit inside a standardized physical measurement box with the magazine inserted, but we're gonna talk about the box later. Because of this box constraint, you cannot run super long magazines. Standard shooters are usually getting around 17 to 19 rounds in their magazine depending on what caliber they use. And also, to shoot major power factor in standard, your bullet must at least be 10mm or 40 caliber. We're gonna talk about major and minor a bit later. Then we have production division. Production is meant to be the out-of-the-box duty gun division. You cannot just show up with any factory gun. It must be explicitly listed in the official IPSC approved production gun list. There has to be no optics, no compensator, and absolutely no external magwells. Modifications are heavily restricted. To prevent people from running very light triggers on duty guns, IPSC enforces a strict minimum trigger pull weight. It's 2.27 kilograms or 5 pounds for the first double action shot, or simply 1.36 kilograms, which is 3 pounds for every shot if it's a striker-fired gun. IPSC strictly caps production at 15 rounds loaded in the magazine. Even if your magazine can hold 17 or 19, you can only load 15. Then we have production optics. This is currently one of the fastest growing divisions in the world. It takes the exact same philosophy of production and just modernizes it for the red dot era. The gun must be chosen from the exact same official IPSC approved production list. You're allowed to mount a single electronic red dot sight, but it must be directly mounted to the slide. Frame-mounted optics or the slide rackers that you see on open guns are completely illegal in production optics. And just like standard production, there's no compensators, no ports, and no external magwells that are allowed. The strict trigger pull weight and the 15-round magazine capacity apply the exact same. If you want to shoot production or production optics, you cannot just assume that your gun is legal in both sports. USPSA and IPSC maintain completely separate approved gun lists. Because USPSA does not enforce a minimum trigger pull weight, their list includes guns that IPSC completely bans from production. Then we have the optics division. This is a cooler one for running a dot. It is more open and race-oriented than production optics. There's no approved gun list and no minimum trigger weight pull. Magazines are not limited to 15 rounds, but they must be no longer than 141.25mm overall length or 170mm for single stack. There are no barrel ports, but slide porting is allowed, and you can do some more modifications like magwells, trigger jobs within the rules. Then we have the classic division. Classic division is dedicated entirely to the 1911 platform. The gun must be based on and visibly resemble to the classic 1911 single stack design. Iron sights only, no optics, no compensators. Like standard, the gun must fit completely inside the IPSC measurement box. Because they are single stack, capacity is strictly restricted by rulebook limits based on power factor. A maximum of 8 rounds loaded if you're shooting a major caliber like 40 or 45, or 10 rounds if you're shooting minor, which is 9mm. We also have revolvers, but I'm really not gonna get into that, that's pretty self-explanatory. Now let's look at USPSA divisions. We have the open division, and just like in IPSC, there's basically no rules. Then we have the limited division. This is the USPSA answer to IPSC's standard division. The guns are high-capacity iron sight pistols dominated by the 40 caliber 2011 platform. Big flared magwells and thumb rests are totally legal. Unlike IPSC standard, there's no physical measurement box in USPSA limited. Your gun can be as long or as heavy as you want. Instead, the rulebook simply restricts your magazine length to 141.25mm, usually holding around 20 to 21 rounds of 40 cal. Let's talk about carry optics. If you walk into any local USPSA match, this is the undisputed king of the range. Carry optic represents nearly 40% of all shooters of the entire organization. The gun must be a factory gun from the USPSA approved production list. You must run a single electronic red dot, and it must be mounted directly on the slide. No compensators, no barrel porting, and absolutely no external magwells allowed. The total gun weight with the optics and the heaviest empty mag cannot exceed 59 ounces. It cannot be single action only, and you get to use the exact same 141.25mm magazines as limited division. This means that carry optic shooters are running around with 22 to 24 rounds of 9mm. Limited optics is the newest fully recognized division in USPSA, and it has absolutely exploded in popularity. Think of limited optics as the bridge between carry optics and a full-blown open race gun. It was specifically created for shooters who wanted to run a red dot but didn't want to give up their favorite single action only triggers. It is heavily dominated by double stack 2011 platforms like staccatos or even custom builds equipped with slide mounted red dots. Unlike carry optics, single action only triggers are 100% legal, and you're allowed to run an external magwell. However, you still cannot use compensator or barrel ports. You run the exact same 141.25mm magazines, and it is scored strictly as a minor power factor. Then we have production division. While it used to be the biggest division in America, the rise of the red dot has shrunk it down to a small, hardcore group of iron sights purists. The gun must be factory iron sight duty guns from the approved gun list, with no optics, no magwells, no external modifications. For decades, the USPSA strictly capped production at 10 rounds to mimic the old legislative limits. But they modernized the rulebook, and today USPSA production is capped at 15 rounds in the magazine, bringing it perfectly in line with IPSC global capacity rules. Unlike IPSC, USPSA production has no minimum trigger pull weight rule. If you want a 2-pound trigger on your striker fire Glock or your double action single action CZ Shadow 2, you can legally run it. Lastly, we have single stack and revolver, but those are pretty self-explanatory. Now we can talk about the famous box. The philosophy behind the box is simple. Instead of writing a 50-page rulebook defining every millimeter of a gun's beaver tail, safety levers, or magwell, the organization just built a physical box. If your gun fits inside of the box with the lid closed and completely flush, then it's legal. If it sticks out, you're instantly bumped into the open division, where you'll be competing against full-blown race guns. But here's the catch. IPSC and USPSA do not use the same box, and they use them for different divisions. IPSC uses metric dimension. The official box has an internal dimension of exactly 225mm by 150mm by 45. When you hand your gun to the range officer at the equipment check, they're going to ensure that the slide is perfectly parallel to the longest side of the box, that the hammer is cocked, and that the safety is applied, which means it is in ready condition. Then you must insert your biggest magazine into the gun. Now let's look at USPSA. Remember how we said that USPSA limited carry optics and limited optics do not use a box? Well, they use a completely separate vertical metal gauge to measure the raw length of the magazine. However, USPSA does still use a physical measuring box, but strictly for two specific divisions, production and single stack. And because it's America and dimensions are in inches, they are a little bit different from IPSC. The USPSA box measures 8 and 15/16 of an inch, 6 inches, and 1 inch and 5/8. If we convert that to metric, that's 227mm by 152 by 41.3mm. The USPSA box is slightly longer and taller than the IPSC box, but it is narrower. Now let's talk about the competition rigs. Here's exactly how you have to set up your rig to be legal in IPSC. First things first, the belt itself. Now IPSC is incredibly strict about ensuring that your rig doesn't shift or droop during a stage, which could give you an unfair mechanical advantage. The rules state that your outer belt must be securely fastened at hip level and must be attached to an inner belt that is either permanently fixed or woven through a minimum of 3 belt loops. Men must wear the belt explicitly at waist level, while female competitors get a slight anatomical exception in the rulebook. They are legally allowed to wear their belt and equipment lower down at hip level if their natural waistline makes a high waist draw impractical. And we have the hip bone rule in IPSC. For every single handgun division in IPSC except open and revolver, the rulebook enforces a strict geographical boundary on your body, the hip bone line or the iliac crest. In standard, production optics, and classic, the foremost portion of your gun, while being holstered, and of all your magazine pouches must be entirely behind your hip bone. So even if you have a magnet, the magazine on that magnet must be behind the hip bone. You must have a line coming from both of your hip bones, and if anything passes that 180 line, it's illegal in IPSC. This means that you cannot have magazines sitting on the front of your stomach. Everything has to be pushed back along your side and rear. Range officers at major matches will literally look down your side or use a plastic alignment card to check your hip bone. If the front edge of your gun or your first mag pouch creeps forward of that line by even a small amount, you fail the equipment check. And that plastic alignment card is basically the size of a credit card. Then we also have the distance from the body rule, which is the 50mm rule. It's the distance between your torso and the closest internal surface of the handgun or any magazine, and that distance cannot exceed 50mm, which is about 2 inches. The range officer will take a specialized 50mm measuring block, and he's gonna slide it between your body and your magazines, for example, and if those magazines are more than 50mm outside of your body, then that's illegal. And it's the same thing for your gun, because you don't want to have your gun all the way out, which is going to give you an illegal mechanical advantage. Then we have the holster height and the angles. Your holster has to keep the gun safe and secure during dynamic movement, like running or climbing. The holster must completely cover the trigger guard, so it's physically impossible to touch the trigger while the gun is in it. And also, the heel of the gun, which is the top of the grip, has to be above the top edge of your belt. So the guns cannot be all the way down, like you see sometimes on tactical holsters. But there is one exception. As always, open division plays by its own set of rules. If you're shooting an IPSC open race gun, the hip bone rule completely disappears. You can position your holster directly in the front of your hip if you want. It's the same thing for the magazines. You can just put the magazines anywhere you want. The only thing that open shooters still have to obey is that 50mm rule from the body. Now let's talk about USPSA. And let's start with the single biggest difference. USPSA completely deleted the hip bone restriction for all divisions. But just because you can put your gear anywhere doesn't mean that you can mount it on a giant metal extension arm. USPSA still limits you on how far your gun can stick out from your body. However, the way that this is measured is a bit different. And the way they do this is by using the plastic overlay that we talked about, which is the size of a credit card. This varies for different divisions. For productions, carry optics, single stack, and revolver, your gear cannot sit further away than 2 1/8 of an inch. To measure this, the RO will take a standard scoring overlay, put it sideways, and just pass it. If it passes, then it's illegal. Now this is different for open, limited, and limited optics. Because these are the faster custom divisions, they give you a little bit more breathing room. And this is simply by twisting the card sideways. The limit is pushed to 3 3/8 of an inch. Now while you can place your gear anywhere, USPSA places strict rules on the type of holster you use depending on your division to keep the spirit of the class intact. For open, limited, and limited optics, you're fully allowed to use race holsters. These are those minimalistic skeletonized holsters where the gun isn't sitting in a bucket of Kydex. It's literally locking onto the trigger guard. Now, you cannot use those for production and carry optics. Race holsters are strictly prohibited in those divisions. Here, the rulebook states that your holster must be suitable for everyday use. It must be a traditional closed-body Kydex or leather holster that fully covers the slide up to within half an inch of the ejection port. Drop offset hangers are totally legal to lower the gun down, but the heel of the gun butt must still be above the top edge of your belt. Now let's talk about the paper targets. If you walk into a match in Europe or Asia, the bay is going to look completely different than a match bay in America. This is because IPSC and USPSA use entirely different shapes for their primary cardboard targets. If you've shot in the United States, you are familiar with this target. Now this is a smaller one, but the big ones are 18 by 30 inches. Now these look like human silhouettes, and they even have a hitbox right here at the top. Historically, this was called the IPSC metric target, back when the rules were identical worldwide. But as the sport evolved, USPSA kept this target as their absolute bread and butter. We have the alpha zone, which is split into two distinct locations, which is right here on the bottom and at the headbox. Then we have the B zone, which technically is all this. There's a line here, so ignore that, but it's outside of the A zone and outside of the headbox. And then we have the delta, which is right here. And most importantly, targets like these are illegal to shoot in France because they resemble human silhouettes. So if I were to shoot something like this here, then I would be in a lot of trouble. Now this is different for IPSC. IPSC uses targets that look like this, but obviously bigger, called the classic targets. We have the alpha, which is this zone right here. Then we have the Charlie, which is right outside the alpha, and then the delta. So it's kind of like the other one, but it doesn't look like a human, so it's not scary. So when I was talking earlier about the points that you could have per match to calculate your hit factor, these zones have different points for each power factor, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. So the points are very easy to score. If the bullet is inside of the A zone, then it's going to be an A zone point. However, if the bullet is technically on the Charlie, but it slightly touches the line, it's gonna count as an alpha. Now let's talk penalties, because nothing ruins a high hit factor faster than penalties. If you shoot a target that isn't supposed to be shot, called a no-shoot, or you miss a target completely, which is called a mic, both sports hit you with a minus 10-point penalty. Remember, that doesn't mean that you lose 5 points that you could have earned, but it physically subtracts 10 points from the points that you already secured on that stage. The no-shoot targets, both in USPSA and IPSC, are white, so you literally just have to flip your targets. And now let's talk power factor. If there were no power factor rules, everyone would just shoot the softest, lightest, lowest recoil 9mm ammunition possible to shoot. This would mean that your gun simply shoots faster because there's less recoil. To prevent that, both sports use a mathematical formula to reward shooters who are willing to manage the heavy recoil of more powerful ammunition. The baseline formula is the exact same for both sports. It's the bullet weight in grains times the muzzle velocity in feet per second divided by 1,000. If you hit a specific number threshold, you get scored as major. If you fall below that threshold, but you stay above the baseline floor, you're scored as a minor. Why does this matter? The reason you care about this comes down to the cardboard target scoring that we were just talking about. Every target has the alpha, Charlie, delta zone. For minor, it's 5 points for alpha, 3 for Charlie, and 1 for delta. For major, it's 5 for alpha, 4 for Charlie and 2 for Delta. Now there are more points when you're shooting major, however there's more recoil, so technically it's a little bit harder. While the scoring values are identical, IPSC and USPSA disagree on exactly how much energy constitutes major power, and they enforce completely different caliber restrictions to get there. It changes across divisions. For open division, the USPSA major threshold is 165, and there's no minimum bullet weight. This allows shooters to load a standard 9mm bullet with a massive amount of gunpowder, creating a category that's called as 9mm major. The high gas volume fits the compensator perfectly to keep the gun flat. Now in IPSC, the major threshold is lower at 160, but they enforce a strict safety rule. The bullet weight cannot be lower than 120 grains. If you try to cheat the system in IPSC with a lighter 115 grain bullet, you're automatically scored as a minor, regardless of how fast your bullet is flying. For standard and limited division, USPSA's threshold for major is 165. To qualify for major scoring, your bullet must be at least 10mm or 40 caliber. Now for IPSC standard major threshold, it's a little bit higher at 170, but there's still the rule that your bullet must be at least 10mm or 40 caliber. For production and carry optics, USPSA states that everyone is scored as a minor. Even if you step in the line with a 45 or a 40 Smith & Wesson, you're still gonna get 3 points for Charlie. Now for IPSC, while production and production optics are strictly minor only, just like in the US, IPSC allows major scoring in classic and revolver division. Let's talk about how stages are structured. IPSC runs on strict mathematical ratios and balance, whereas USPSA leaves the stage layout completely open-ended. In IPSC, a match director cannot just build whatever they feel like. The global rulebook enforces a strict percentage balance for any sanctioned match. Stages are formally classified into 3 categories based on round count. There's the short courses with a maximum of 12 rounds, medium with a maximum of 24, and long with a maximum of 32 rounds. The rulebook dictates that a match must have a 3-to-1 ratio. For every 3 short courses, there must be 2 medium courses and 1 long course. IPSC also mandates that long courses cannot require more than 32 rounds, and they explicitly state that you cannot require a shooter to fire more than 8 shots from any single viewing position or location. This forces the stage designer to build dynamic layouts that constantly make you run, move, and change their position. Now, in USPSA, they completely ignore the 3-to-1 course ratio. If an American match director wants to build a local match that features 5 massive 32-round long courses and only 1 short classifier, they can legally do it. While USPSA also caps its standard long courses at a maximum of 32 rounds, they measure the positioning rules slightly differently. Instead of IPSC's strict 8 shot per position rule, USPSA allows you to shoot up to 9 rounds per view or location, or 10 if you have a forced reload. Let's talk a bit about that location. IPSC uses location. It's a physical spot on the ground. Now, if you're standing in a 2x2 shooting box, you can only see a maximum of 8 rounds worth of targets from that box. USPSA is a bit different. They use the view. The view is a specific line of sight. Your location doesn't really matter. USPSA lets the stage director build a single long shooting array where you can see 12 or 15 rounds worth of targets without moving your feet, as long as they are split across different views. If you have to lean on the left and then lean on the right without moving your feet, that counts as a different view. In IPSC, stage designers are strictly prohibited from forcing you to shoot from a specific stance or position on medium and long courses. They cannot force you to kneel, they cannot force you to prone, and they cannot mandate strong hand only or weak hand only shooting. The rulebook says that a medium or long course must be entirely freestyle. The only time that an IPSC designer can force a specific position or a single hand shooting style is on short courses. In USPSA, the rules are much more punishing. A stage designer can build a massive, complex 32-round long course, put a box at the very end of it, and write in the briefing that you must only shoot with strong hand only or weak hand only. In conclusion, they are basically the same but different. The only important thing to know is that no matter what gun you shoot in what discipline, you should still go train. Let me know if I missed something down in the comments. Dennis, out.